Life is full of tough choices. Sometimes we have to step out in faith, even when we don't understand everything. That's what Jacob did. Jacob as Jacob. I was living in Canaan, but a famine hit the land. My son Joseph was in Egypt. Joseph sent for me and our whole family to come to Egypt for food and safety. It was a big decision for me to leave my home. I had to trust God. I went to Beersheba to pray. I needed God's direction and blessing. Jacob's prayer was a humble one. He knew he needed God's help. He was ready to follow God's plan. God heard Jacob's prayer. He spoke to Jacob in a vision. God as God. Jacob, do not be afraid to go to Egypt. I promise to be with you. I will make you into a great nation in Egypt. I will bring your family back to Canaan one day. I will never leave you. Jacob was encouraged. God's promise gave him strength. He knew he could face the unknown. Jacob as Jacob. With God's promise, I felt a newfound strength within me. I knew I could face whatever lay ahead. Jacob and his family packed up their belongings. They set out for Egypt with all their possessions. It was a long journey. They traveled with their flocks and herds. They brought their wives and children. The whole family was going together. They were united. They were ready for a new adventure. Jacob as Jacob. I felt God's presence with us. I knew he was leading the way. I was filled with hope and expectation. Jacob had 12 sons. They were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin. Each son had his own family. They would all go down to Egypt with Jacob. These sons were the future of Jacob's family. They would become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Their descendants would be God's chosen people. Jacob as Jacob. My family was growing. God was fulfilling his promise. He was making me into a great nation. Jacob's family was growing. God was fulfilling his promise. He was making Jacob into a great nation. Finally, Jacob and his family reached Egypt. They were reunited with Joseph. It was an emotional moment. They had been separated for many years.
Father.
Joseph ran to meet his father. He hugged him tightly. Tears of joy streamed down their faces.
My son, my beloved son.
It was a moment they would never forget. The years melted away. They were just father and son, filled with love and gratitude. There was so much to talk about. Joseph had been through a lot. His brothers had sold him into slavery, but God had raised him up. He was now second in command in Egypt.
I forgive you, my brothers.
Joseph forgave his brothers. He knew it was God's plan all along. God had used even bad situations for good. The family was healed and whole again.
We are so thankful, Joseph. Truly, God had a plan.
They realized God had a plan. He had brought them together in Egypt. He would protect them and provide for them. Joseph introduced his family to Pharaoh. Pharaoh welcomed them to Egypt. He gave them the land of Goshen to live in. Goshen was a fertile land. It was perfect for their flocks and herds.
Welcome to Egypt. You shall have the land of Goshen.
Jacob and his family were grateful. They had found a safe haven in a foreign land. God was taking care of them.
Thank you, Pharaoh. We are deeply grateful.
God can open doors we never expect. He can lead us to places of blessing and abundance. Section 8, Goshen's Bounty, a place of abundance. Jacob and his family settled in Goshen. They prospered in the land. Their flocks and herds multiplied. They had plenty of food and provisions. God blessed them abundantly. They were content in their new home. They were surrounded by family and love. God's favor was upon them. God takes care of his children. He provides for their needs. He gives them peace and security. Section 9, Faith's Reward. God's promises fulfilled. Jacob lived for 17 years in Egypt. He saw his family grow and prosper. God had kept his promise. He had made Jacob into a great nation. Jacob's faith had been rewarded. He had trusted God. God had never let him down. When we trust in God, we can experience his blessings. He will fulfill his promises in our lives. Section 10. A legacy endures, from Egypt to the Promised Land. Jacob's family would stay in Egypt for many years, but God had not forgotten his promise. He would bring them back to the Promised Land. Their descendants would become the nation of Israel. They would carry God's blessing to the world. It all started with Jacob's faith. God's plans are bigger than we can imagine. He works through generations to fulfill his purposes. Section 11. Our journey of faith, trusting God's plan. Jacob's story is an inspiration to us. It reminds us to trust God, even when we don't understand his ways. God has a plan for our lives. He will lead us and guide us. He will never leave us nor forsake us. Let's step out in faith and follow him. Our journey may take us to unexpected places, but if we keep our trust in God, we will find our way to his promised blessings.